Hi, I'm Gabriel from GabrielSeanWallace.com, and this is Identity Coaching with Movies, the podcast where we use movies as coaching tools. I'm an identity coach, which means that I help you to rediscover, reconnect, and recreate your identity from the inside out. And in this podcast, we use movies as the magnificent tools they are for identity coaching. In this episode, we're using the movie Spirited Away to look at core identity versus consumed identity. This is episode number 6 of Identity Coaching with Movies, the podcast where we use movies as tools for personal development and identity work. And in this episode, we are investigating the gorgeous 2001 classic Japanese animated movie Spirited Away by Hayao Miyazaki of Studio Ghibli. This film offers such a rich and cryptic tapestry of magic and myth. It's ideal for identity work. And I've used this with so many of my clients, and I am yet to have a client who has not found it a very profitable experience. Keep listening to the whole podcast to learn the significance of the greedy frog, who the mysterious girl is that Chihiro sees on the bridge, and why the bathhouse is a brothel. Now, if you'd like the identity worksheet that supplements this movie and this podcast, I highly recommend it. You go to my website at GabrielSeanWallace.com, and there will be a pop-up that will ask you if you want access to all my identity worksheets from every episode of this podcast. Enter your email and get instant free access to all those worksheets and all future worksheets. That's GabrielSeanWallace.com, GabrielSeanWallace.com. Now, I've been away for about a month, and that is because I have been super busy creating a creativity online course. Now, you may already be aware that I am a professional creativity coach as well as an identity coach. And I've finally created an online video course that you can take and get access to all of my best creative thinking tools, techniques, tricks, but also there's a lot of deep theory in the course that I have created. And it's 18 hours long. Now, just to give you some context to that, I usually charge $500 for 6 hours one-to-one with me for creativity coaching. Okay, that's not my identity coaching, but creativity coaching, that's what I charge. $500 for 6 hours. Now, this course, you do not get the personalization, right? However, you get 18 hours of video lessons where I just give you everything that I've got. I'm talking right from the foundations and the principles of creativity to the lifelong practices to the warm-up techniques to your creator psychology, your divergent thinking skills, your convergent thinking skills. I go into how to use your unconscious mind when you are practicing creativity. We go into the research stage. I've got a section on group creativity in case you're a leader and you want to get your team to be creative. I also give you a lot of visualizations and meditations, which I will keep adding to. I've got FAQs, I've got bonuses, I've got lots of things in this 18-hour creativity course. So if that interests you, and this course is not just for artists. This course is for innovators of any kind. We all need to be creative in life, right? So whatever it is that you do or you think you do or who you think you are, right? We need creativity in our lives. We create ourselves, in fact, through creativity. So this is actually how I got into creativity, through identity work. I promise you this course will be one of the most valuable purchases that, definitely of the year, if not of your life. And you can get it for an insanely cheap price at the moment. It's not going to stay that price. In fact, I have plans in the near future to put it just on my own platform and sell it at a much higher price than what it is available for now. And I have a link to that course wherever you are listening to this podcast. So definitely check that out. And that's all about that. Now, let's go into this movie. This film, Spirited Away, has so much to explore. If you've not seen this film, I have to say that I highly encourage you to pause this podcast right now and go watch the movie. There will be spoilers, and you will gain a lot more from this podcast by having watched the film already. I will assume throughout the rest of this podcast that you've watched the whole movie. So what is this about? It's about a young girl called Chihiro who is moving house with her parents when they all stumble upon an abandoned theme park on the way to the new house, and they go inside. Chihiro is not too happy about it, but the parents decide to go explore, and the parents appear to turn into pigs when they gorge on food, and Chihiro is thrust into a spirit world where she must effectively grow up in order to save her parents and find her way back home. So, in this podcast, we do not go scene by scene. We go theme by theme. And there are 3 themes today. Number 1, transition and maturity. Theme 2, consumption and possession. And number 3, core identity. So, before we get into those themes, I have 3 questions for you. And these are all on your worksheet as previewing questions. So, here they are. Number 1, do you think each individual has a core identity at the center of themselves? Or is each individual more of an inner community without a specific center? It's a very interesting question, that. And it's a very layered, very nuanced question as well. But ask it for yourself. Okay, there may not be a right answer. I'm not going to give you a right answer, but Ask that for yourself. Question number 2. How much of your own identity or values or actions do you think you have consciously created? And how much have you unconsciously consumed from society? In other words, how much has society made you? How much have you taken from society and just made that who you are? And how much have you consciously created? And number 3, take a few minutes to really consider all the ways in which you have been influenced by social values and expectations without really wanting to be. For example, advertising, social media, propaganda, tradition, globalization, etc. Perhaps there are times when you find yourself sacrificing your own plans, your own values, or your own integrity when exposed to these influences. When do you feel that you are most vulnerable to these influences? For example, when you are lonely, or hungry, or sad, or confused, or angry, or guilty, right? So think about that for a few minutes. And now we'll get into these themes. So number 1, transition and maturity. This movie is full of scenes and symbols and motifs that are very much about transitions. We have bridges, we have staircases, we have elevators, we have tunnels, we have cars, we have trains. And these are all highly symbolic. Now, there was a quote by Miyazaki himself, the genius director who created Spirited Away, and he was talking about the origins of this movie, the inception for the idea. And he said, "I would like to make this film something through which 10-year-old girls can encounter what it is they truly want." So here, this is a kind of coming-of-age movie, particularly aimed at girls who are making that transition into adolescence, right? It's a very critical age for both boys and girls. And he does this in magical ways. He has an immersive magical realism throughout this movie, as he always does in his films. He has animism, which is giving life to nature. He has that spread out in all of his movies as well. And this one, you can feel the energy, the energy that nature vibrantly exerts throughout the movie, right? He's created a world where anthropoids, talking animals, and chimeras coexist. A chimera is an animal that is a combination of other animals. And he's created this spirit world where life is infused into all of these different creatures. And this is the world that helps Chihiro to make the transition, right? The spirit world, because it is through the spirit that someone changes. It's through the spirit that big identity transitions are made ultimately. So, at the beginning of the movie, they are driving to their new home, and you can see that Chihiro at this stage is a spoiled dependent, right? She's not wearing a seatbelt. She complains about where she's going. She complains about the bouquet of flowers, or about the flower that her dad gave her for her birthday even. And so she's pretty spoiled. I think we can all agree. And there's an article online by someone called Jana Jana Monji. And it says, her friends have given her a nice bouquet. If there are 5 stages of loss and grief, right? We've been through these 5 stages in the Groundhog Day podcast, right? Denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. Then Chihiro, this is what is in the article, then Chihiro is at the end of denial, and her comment about how unfortunate it is to get her first bouquet as a farewell gift indicates that she is entering anger. So she is, in a sense, grieving the loss of her old home, of her former life. And something that's just occurred to me as I was finishing off these notes for this podcast is this theme of home comes up quite a bit, and I would suggest that we interpret home as not something external, but a home within ourselves, a center, a heart. Like that old expression, home is where the heart is. How about we take that literally for this film? So she's trying to get back home, right? Well, she's trying to find herself. She's trying to find the center of what it is that, well, who it is that she is. Then they stop next to an old Tory leaning against a tree and a bunch of old miniature shrines that her mother says some people believe spirits reside in. Some people believe that spirits actually live there, right? A home for the spirits, a spiritual home. And that's when things start to change for her and for the whole family. Then they're in the old theme park, and you can see, or we can see, that there's this artificial spirituality. When the father says that it's all fake, it's made of plaster. Now, this is the first signal of the despiritualization of humanity. That humanity, particularly Japan, by the way, has gone through some kind of spiritual crisis, a despiritualization, where things are fake now and things are hollow. Chihiro says, I'm not going, and she clings to her mother, right? She's still in this state of dependence. And one thing that I did pick up on as they were going through the little cathedral there is that the window on the wall actually looks like the Windows logo. The Windows, like Windows XP, Microsoft. It looks like that logo, and I'm not sure whether that was intentional. I would assume that it is intentional, and I'm not sure whether that was just a nod or a tribute to the Windows logo. I wouldn't be surprised if it was just a nod to Windows, because he also does that with Pixar later in the movie with the hopping lamppost. And this is a tribute to Pixar, because their little symbol is that hopping moving lamp, right? And so I wouldn't be surprised if that was it. Just a little tangent there. And so now they get into the abandoned theme park. And there's another great article that I found and read online called Regaining Continuity with the Past by someone called A. Satoshi in a journal called Project Muse. And I think it's she, but well, whoever it is, they're writing about the journey from adolescence into adulthood in Chihiro or in general. And it says that in this scene, when the parents turn into pigs, that this signifies that Chihiro has lost one of the most important sources of her identity and the means to maintain continuity with the past, right? Everyone's parents are extremely important sources of our identity and with our past. And so when she loses this, it breaks that continuity that she has with the past. So she's kind of lost in that the link from who she was to who she is now in her current situation. The link is broken. And when this happens, this is a problem for anyone. And so Chihiro has to learn how to deal with that, right? So it says here that her mission can be summed up as to regain the past. Now, I'm not sure I 100% agree with that, because I don't see her mission as regaining who she was. I think that the transition that she makes is very forward living, and it's very much about a recreation of herself rather than a regaining, right? So one thing that is just so important in this movie is really the context of Japan. And Miyazaki is really trying to say something here about the decay of Japanese society and Japanese identity. And I think it can be applied, though, to a lot of different kinds of national identities. For sure, the same kinds of dangers and risks and threats to our identity come up in our current culture, right? And so it's identity crisis at the national level. And when you have an identity crisis at the national level, it filters into the hearts of the people who make the nation and begins this vicious cycle of the corruption and pollution of identity through the occidentalization of Japan. And what it takes to save a nation is for someone to rescue themselves on a personal level, right? And for that hero to become influential enough in society to demonstrate a way out of the crisis. That's what a hero is. A hero first has to save themselves before they save a country, before they save a whole group of people. First, they have to save themselves. And so what this is about is it's about that hero in Chihiro. Now, this is difficult for a person because most people do not even realize that there is a crisis. When you don't realize that there is an identity crisis in yourself, how can you work on it? How can you save yourself? First, you have to become conscious of the fact that there's a crisis. Never mind a crisis on the national level, just a crisis on the individual level, right? This is a very important part of it, is just to become aware. So then what happens when the parents are gorging themselves on this food? The dark comes, and when the dark comes, Chihiro is actually standing on a bridge, right? She's in that period of transition, and she sees Haku, right, who can wander between the worlds somehow. And then the lamps are lit with the coming of the dark. The spirits come out in their spectral form, which literally scares the living daylight out of her. So she sees now, when she runs back, she sees that her mother and father have turned into pigs. And this scares her. And so she runs to the water. She runs to the water because, well, water is one of those cleansing places that we instinctually go to, right? But what she sees there is that a boat is approaching out of an evanescent mist, which almost looks like a mirage at first, but it sharpens the closer it gets. And that's when she begins to disappear. Now, there's an implication that the spirits have been doing work in the human world. I think so. I think that, they're coming back. They're coming back here on a boat. It seems to be like they've been working throughout the day, perhaps in the human world, which never completely gets answered what that's all about, but I find that fascinating. And so this is where they come to replenish themselves, as we later find out. They come out in this grand, euphonious music, and they are welcomed as guests as they cross the bridge. And so she meets Haku, and she has to get into the spirit world in order to survive, right? And in order to do that, she has to cross the bridge. See, this bridge is very much a symbol already of the transition that she's going to have to make. And she has to hold her breath. And as she's walking across the bridge, holding her breath, we see No Face already. I'm not sure if you will remember that. If you've watched the video, you know who No Face is. We see No Face right here. He's just standing there on the bridge, and he can see her. He can see Chihiro somehow. And so she's almost across the bridge. They almost get completely across when the frog leaps up, and she can't hold her breath any longer. She gasps for air when the frog leaps up. And it's very telling that it's a frog, because a frog is usually a symbol of the unconscious, because it can go down under the water, but it can also leap up, right? It's a symbol. It's a classic mythological symbol of the unconscious. The frog goes down below the surface, swims below the surface. It can come up and jump up when it's ready. And so she breathes when the frog leaps up. Now, you cannot have consciousness without breath, right? And you cannot have breath without consciousness. So the two here are very much linked together. And this comes up again later on with Yubaba. All right, breath and consciousness here are connected, right? So then that's when the frog becomes conscious that she is there, and so she's not yet safe. She's across the bridge, but she has to integrate into the spirit world. She's now fully in the spirit world, but she's not one of them. So she's given instructions by Haku. Well, first she has to take the pill or the tablet that he gives her, right? The medicine. And so she does that. And she's given instructions that Yubaba will turn you into an animal unless she gets a job, right? So unless she matures and unless she contributes to this world in some way, contributes to the spirit world, right? And he tells her that he's known her since she was very small. So again, there's something about this that seems like Haku has something to do with her unconscious mind, right? But anyway, she finds her way down, heroically, I might add, down that staircase on the outside of the building. She finds Kumaji, and this is where we really get a sense of her palpable innocence. But it's also precisely where she begins her transition of self-driven growth, right? Crossing the bridge, Haku had helped her. And mentorship is crucial, but there comes a point when you must independently grow. And her refusal to give up compels her into this. After all, what else is she going to do, right? There's nothing else for her to do anyway. She can't go anywhere else. She has to get a job. So she's forced into this situation. She's forced to grow up. And that's what life does sometimes. So she has nowhere else to go. She has to proceed. And so she slowly learns etiquette. Bowing to Kumaji, right? And thanking the radish spirit and not looking at him when she's not supposed to, which is important in Japanese culture, by the way. She's treated brusquely, much how most people are treated on their first few days of work. I've certainly had this experience, right? On her first day of work, everyone's kind of, everyone's treating her like she can't, like she's new and she doesn't understand, and everyone's kind of getting a little bit irritated with her. And so I think this is normal on a first day of work or a first week or even a couple of weeks at work. It is particularly common in places like a fast food joint or a restaurant, right? Because the people who treat you that way tended to have gone through the same process of learning and not knowing as much and being too slow not too long ago. And so they collectively treat the new people as inferior because it makes them feel more secure. Right? They're not as slow anymore. So by treating you, if you're new at work, if they treat you as slow and they get irritated with you, that makes them feel better about themselves. Like they're now safe. It's a security issue on their part. So she is forced to learn and grow up because of necessity. And boy, does she ever. She does a fantastic job, right? We see later on, we'll get into the stink spirit and everything and how she handles that situation. And she just takes stride after stride and becomes more and more mature because she has a goal, right? And she is forced to be in this situation that really pushes her. I want to touch on Yubaba's big baby, right? Yubaba is raising this big baby, and she is the leader of this place. She is the leader of the bathhouse. And yet, she's raising a big baby, not letting him go out, right? Not putting him through any of these rites of passage, not putting him through any of these tests of maturity. We don't know how old he is, but we do know that he can talk and that he's huge. This definitely is saying, again, something about Japanese culture and the fears that Miyazaki had, that Japan was essentially raising a society of babies. So we'll talk about this big baby a little bit later on as well, but I just found this character pretty interesting. Then Haku comes up again and says, well, meet me at the bridge. Again, the bridge between worlds. And again, as she walks across the bridge early in the morning when everyone else is asleep, we again see No Face between the worlds, just standing there. The first time you watch this movie, it doesn't seem like anything, but he's just there. And then later, of course, he becomes a key character. But he has nowhere to go. We can see that here. He has nowhere to go. He doesn't belong anywhere. And he and Haku seem to be attached, because Haku also has nowhere to go. Haku doesn't know who he is. And No Face doesn't have a face. He doesn't know who he is, right? They're both between worlds. And every time she goes with Haku somewhere, we see this No Face character. And I'm not sure whether or not they're related somehow, but there's definitely at least a thematic connection there. Now, when Sen is working, she doesn't know what she's doing, but she's starting to learn by just accepting her new role in the hope that she'll leave and get home soon, right? And so, but she's learning and she's doing very well, only she leaves the door open for No Face, this character who has nowhere to go. She leaves the door open for him. And when you leave the doors open, trouble comes in from those who only want to consume, right? This is why we have security locks on our houses. We don't want someone to come in and threaten our safety, right? We don't want someone to take our possessions, and we don't want someone to take our physical well-being away from us. We don't want someone to come in and kill us, right? But when we leave the doors open, then we are leaving ourselves vulnerable. And this is also psychological. If you leave your psychological door open to the influence of other people, well, they better be real guests. They better be coming with something of value for you, right? Psychological value, or at least someone whom you can trust, not someone who doesn't know who they are, who only wants to take, who only wants to consume, right? But Chihiro doesn't know that. She's still got this innocence about her at this stage, and so she leaves the door open, and he comes in. No Face comes in. And Yubaba, she senses something is coming. And we don't know at that point whether what she is sensing is the stink spirit or No Face or what, but interestingly, she senses something. But she's still not sure what it is. And then soon after that, we see that Haku is sick. He's got all these paper birds chasing him. And I tried to figure out for a while why these birds were paper. And it does occur to me that all the other animals in this movie are ones that can talk, and animals that have this very human-like spirit about them, right? And they're intelligent. Whereas these birds, we are distinguishing them in that they are not actual animals. They are paper under the spell of sorcerers, I guess you would say. And so that's how we are distinguishing them from the other spirits. So when she's climbing on the side of the building this time, she's much more courageous and assertive. So you can see that there's a huge difference from when she was running down the stairs at the beginning screaming, and now when she's climbing on the side of the building, right? And so then she goes and saves Haku. And then we return to the big baby, right? The baby that has been kept in this room, being told that he'll get sick if he ever leaves the room. And Zeniba transforms the characters, transforms the big baby and those 3 heads that are jumping around. And those 3 heads also, you have to remember that we've got a character called No Face, and then we've got 3 faces jumping around. But these faces are always giving these blank, empty stares, right? There's no personality in these faces. They're just empty, blank, hollow stares out into space. And so these belong also to Yubaba. And so we get this impression that Yubaba has been collecting these identities and turning them really into these hollow heads, right? And so Chihiro leaves the bathhouse on the train with, of course, the big baby who needs to make a transition, and with No Face who needs to make this transition as well, because he doesn't know who he is either. Remember, we're still on part 1 with the transitioning and maturity, but we'll get into that other stuff with the stink spirit and No Face and the big fiasco that happened there in another section. Now, the train ride is what would classically be recognized as the road back, right, in a Joseph Campbell sense. Now, Chihiro looks out the window at one point and sees on the platform a shadowy figure of a little girl that looks kind of like her, or what she used to be. And this is the key. She is leaving the little girl she used to be on the platform. She has grown up. That is what the significance of that little clip is. When she looks out the window and there's this mysterious shadowy figure of a little girl looking back up at her in the window. It's who she used to be. She's leaving that behind. So on that train, a symbolic motif of transformation, she makes her transition. And by the way, I mentioned trains in the last one as well on Life is Beautiful. And there's a fantastic video by there's a YouTube channel called What's So Great About That. And that is a YouTube channel that I highly recommend, by the way. What's So Great About That is a fantastic channel that goes deep into movies, and also she touches on identity issues in quite a few of her videos. This one on trains is relevant right now, but there's also the best video on YouTube on Spirited Away is by What's So Great About That. Just look it up. And she also has some fantastic other videos on movies and identity. The one about the Lego movie comes to mind. I would absolutely love to do a podcast with her in the future, perhaps. We'll see. So this is a very key transition on the train. And when Chihiro is then flying back on the back of Haku, she remembers his name, and Haku sheds his skin. He is reborn when she remembers his name. That is his transition as they are going through the sky, and they fall. And that falling is very reminiscent of a kind of falling through consciousness, right? They're going down below the surface of consciousness because they are retrieving Haku's name. And then by the end, the big baby is standing in front of his mother. He has grown up through having his own adventure, right? And finally, when Chihiro is at last returning home, she's told not to look back. And this is important because by looking forward instead of back, she matures. And this is why I'm saying that she's not merely regaining her past, right? She is looking forward. She is transitioning. And she says, I can handle it, which is something that is a very grown-up thing to say, right? I can handle whatever is happening to me. I can take responsibility for it. So, and then finally we see that they get back to the car and time has passed. So it remains to be known how much time has passed, but it's evident that human time has been going on still, right? So that is, I went on a few tangents there, but that was transitions and maturity. That was theme number 1. Now we're on to theme number 2, which is consumption and possession. Consumption, acquisition, possession. This is the inner mantra of the condemned. When I say condemned, I'm talking about people who have truly lost who they are, lost their identity. More and more for the last century, we have witnessed an increase in a consumerist culture. And now we are at the point where what we have online makes us who we are, right? It's not even simply just the physical material goods that make us who we are anymore, although that is still a big part of what people believe and hold to be true, unfortunately. But now it's online. It's how many friends we have, not in the real world, but on the internet. What's that number next to the symbol? How many friends do we have? How many likes on our social media accounts? Right? Possession has taken a new form. And possession and identity have become so intertwined that we have forgotten the values we truly have in our hearts. Right? Our Facebook identity is so intertwined with what we have on our identity online. We have forgotten why we ever went to the bathhouse, right? Why we wanted to replenish ourselves wherever we are. what it means to be human. We've forgotten what it means to have a spiritual side. We've forgotten what it means to truly be an integrated human being. Instead, it's so much about what we can consume, what we can possess. And so there's a question in your worksheet that asks you about all of the characters and whether they define themselves by what they have, by what they do, or by who they are. And so we're going to go through all of these characters one by one in this theme. So let's start with the parents. Now, we've got the dad. And the dad says things like, "We're fine. I've got 4-wheel drive." He's very proud of his 4-wheel drive that he has. Daddy's got credit cards and cash, right? Don't worry. Daddy's got credit cards and cash. And the parents want to take a shortcut. They want to overindulge. They do not listen to their daughter. And yet they rely on her to save them. Now this is something again that Miyazaki is talking about Japan with, right? The older generations of Japan are hoping that the new generation can save them. Because the old generation took shortcuts to rely on the Americanization that Japan went through, and he's saying that was an act of greed and overindulgence. Now, the parents, they were drawn in by the scent of the food, and the father was already behaving primarily out of a more animalistic nature. There's this fabulous shot that you probably have missed where he's running and, the so-called camera, let's call it the frame, he runs right into the frame. It's his crotch, right? It's like the so-called camera is still, and we just see the father running towards this frame, and he runs right toward it with his crotch, and it's not a real camera, right? Obviously, it's animation. So this was done deliberately. The crotch was run right into the frame. This shows a libidinous attraction. This is very deliberate. He is being run by animalistic drives. And, right, that's when he starts saying, "Don't worry, you've got daddy here, he's got credit cards and cash." And the parents, they turn their backs and entirely ignore their daughter, their 10-year-old daughter, as she stands there worrying about the consequences of their actions, and she wanders off in this mysterious abandoned theme park. And they're just eating, not even looking or listening to her. So she sees the bathhouse at this stage and the train under the bridge, and we've already talked about that scene. And then, of course, later on, when she's in the bathhouse, when Chihiro is in the bathhouse, Haku makes a statement like, 3 days of eating our food and she'll smell like us. Now, everyone seems satisfied with this. And that goes to show you that the general perspective of these somewhat greedy, well, not somewhat, these greedy spirits is that what you consume is what changes a person and what can make you less human. You start to lose your humanity when you eat foods of another sort. Now, you can interpret foods in many different ways. And the majority of spirits here, on the whole, they appear to be a bunch of sybarites, unconscious of the threats because of how addicted they are to material possession. And so, let's look at them individually. We've got the frog, and we've already talked about the frog. He is unconsciousness itself. He is tempted by gold. His voice is taken. His voice is his soul, his logos. This is very symbolic as well, by the way. Voice is highly symbolic of the spirit, the soul. So his voice is taken by No-Face, remember? No-Face starts to have voice once he consumes the frog. And so it's like No-Face has consumed the spirit, the logo, the logos, the voice of the frog. Because the frog had a weak identity in the first place, he allowed himself to be consumed through his utter greed, right? He was an easy target. And then we also have the toad, and we see how the toad is thrown off completely by a roasted newt, something he can consume, something dead, right? Now, the toad is the one who is distracted by the elevator, the one who smells the human at first, but then is completely thrown off the scent by the roasted newt, because, again, he is driven by his more primal urges, his desire for food, for satisfaction of his taste buds, right? Well, that's the same reason that the girl takes her upstairs, too, the roasted newt. Yubaba, the owner of the bathhouse, she likes to take identities. We see the bobbing heads, the 3 bobbing heads that are bouncing around there, as if she's already taken their identities, right, with their blank stares. She's absorbed whoever they were, and she's now taking Chihiro's name. She's obsessed with gold and money as well. She forgets about her baby. She doesn't even notice that her baby is not her baby, right? So in the end, that is what's important to her baby. But she has to figure that out. Right, Yubaba is a very interesting character because she goes on a little inner journey of her own, and we see her twin and how Yubaba. It's very significant that Yubaba has a twin. I believe that what they're saying there is that Yubaba has 2 personalities. There's the business side of her, right? There's the side of her that is like, she wants the gold, she wants the money, and she's going to run her business, right? Because that's what she is. But then there's the side of her that loves her family, is kind-hearted, right? And we do see both sides, even just in Yubaba, but it's more accentuated when we see that she's got a twin as well. It's like there are these 2 sides to her. But she's consumed all of this money, and she's got all of this gold and all of these things in her room. And when she's surrounded by that is when she appears most threatening. Then we have the stink spirit. And I've got the question for you in your worksheet. How does Chihiro help the stink spirit? What does the stink spirit turn out to be? Why do you think it had consumed so much junk? Now, as the stink spirit approaches the bathhouse, everyone's holding their noses, running for cover, right? And the frog falls unconscious at the stink spirit. There's that unconsciousness link with the frog again. And the food instantly decays just by sharing the same air as the spirit. And it is Chihiro's job to cleanse this stink spirit, to give it a bath, right? And so she acts more responsible when she's given a job. And, of course, she needs to work in order to help her family. So she has grown in this responsibility. And so she uses the herbal water and she cleanses the spirit. You could even say she spiritually cleanses him. And we find out that he is not by nature a stink spirit, but rather he has consumed a bunch of junk. He's consumed all of this trash that society has given it, right? And luckily, fortunately, the spirit underneath all of that junk was so strong enough to actually know that he should bring himself to the bathhouse to be cleansed. It is already a strong river spirit. I believe it's a river spirit. And so at the end of this cleansing, just before we find out just how strong and powerful this spirit is, to be conscious enough to bring itself to the bathhouse, just before that, Chihiro is given her reward for helping it. She is given the core, right? She's given a core right from the center of the spirit. And this core, we find out later, is medicine, because the core spirit in a character is medicinal. It is a return to health. And so there's all of this gold that remains all over the floor from the spirit. And that's what everyone else goes for. Everyone else goes for the gold, right? But this is still part of the junk. Only Chihiro has the real gift. While everyone else is screaming about the money, she has something much more valuable than that. And this is what brings us to No Face. And the question on your worksheet about No Face is, why does Chihiro refuse the gold offered to her by No Face? What would have happened if she'd taken it? So No Face is able to make gold, and he's able to lure the frog into an easy temptation, right? Because the frog is unconscious. And so that tells you that everyone who is only kind of mindlessly after this gold and all of this material stuff, there's an unconsciousness to that. And that is what ultimately threatens them. It's this unconscious behavior, this lack of awareness, right? And so the frog says, "Gimme, gimme, gimme," and mindlessly drifts towards this gold, and he gets caught in the trap of No Face. He gets eaten, No Face steals his voice, and No Face now has this insatiable appetite for consuming anything and everything. And it's significant that the very first thing he consumed was unconsciousness itself. Everything else is predicated on this unconscious foundation of greed. Right? So what would have happened if Chihiro had taken the gold, well, she would have fallen into this unconscious behavior as well. She may have forgotten about her parents. She may have forgotten her name, right? The more these characters fall into this state of unconsciousness driven by these external material rewards, right? Gold, which is ultimately dirt. The more they fall into these traps, the more they forget who they are. So the other question is, why do you think No-Face says he wants Sen? Or Chihiro? What does Chihiro give No-Face? What happens to him? Why do you think this happens? So No-Face is attracted to Chihiro because she is the only one who has a personal identity. She has a memory of where she comes from, unlike all the other characters. She has not yet been infected by the virus of addiction, consumption, and impurity. She is pure. And in fact, that's where the whole... I don't know if you've heard this. That's where the whole prostitution metaphor comes in. Right? Yes, it's like he's trying to buy her virginity. Right? In Japan, a bathhouse is often known to be a brothel. And it kind of seems like Yubaba is the leader of the prostitutes. What is it? Not a pimp. A pimp is only for a man. I forget what. Oh, in Japanese, it's actually called a Yubaba. A Yubaba is the leader of the prostitutes. That is what the word means, right? So it's it's obvious, right? That's what this kind of represents. And so, yes, it's like he's trying to buy her virginity, but, and this is a big but, this is just another layer of metaphor. It's a red herring. The real message is much deeper than that. She won't sell who she is, right? He is trying to get her to sell out her identity for things, but she's not buying. Right? Someone else in the movie asks, "Who's the guest?" And the girl that's been looking after her says, "Who cares? Let's go get some gold." Right? They don't even give him a name. They just call him Rich Man. So you see, they are willing to buy into all of this, and they are willing to sell their identity. Right? The metaphor about prostitution is that rather than selling sex, they are simply selling their identity. So you see, Miyazaki is using this appearance of prostitution, right? But in fact, the layer underneath that is it's even deeper. It's not just about selling sex; it's about selling identity. And Sen is the only one who is not giving into it because she has her own sense of what she is doing there, what her mission is there. She's holding on to that. She's holding on to her name. She remembers who she is. And so when No-Face says, "I'm lonely, I want Sen," she appears before him and she gives him the same medicine that she gives Haku. Right, the medicine that she received from the spirit, the core. This is a medicine of core identity, right? She received something very pure from the spirit, which was at the center of all that junk, beneath all of the junky layers that the spirit had consumed. And that core is identity. And so identity itself, core identity, is a medicine. And she gives that to Haku. And now she's giving it to to No-Face. And he disgorges out all he consumed. Eventually this makes him better, but he goes through a state of panic. He goes through a state of anxiety, anger, fear, and stirs the whole bathhouse into bedlam. Right? This is a natural process when you're getting rid of your ego, when you are disgorging, discarding the parts that you have consumed that you no longer need, that are not serving you. So he goes into this state of anxiety, and once all the excess is disgorged, he is healed in spirit. That is what No Face is all about. And we also have Kumaji, the Boiler Man. Now, I would argue that Kumaji does not define himself by what he has, but he doesn't quite define himself by who he is either. I would say that he defines himself by what he does. Right at the beginning, he says, I run the boilers. And that is his self-definition. And then we have Haku. And Haku is the provider of food, right? He's the river. He is nature. Nature provides. And he has to eat the medicine that Chihiro gives him eventually. So she returns a positive kind of consumption. And there's a lot of stuff in this movie about how consumption clouds one's sense of identity and really pollutes someone's sense of identity. But Miyazaki in this movie also acknowledges that there is a nourishing kind of consumption as well. One can be nourished through consumption, and that's what Haku's medicine does. And that's what the medicine that Chihiro receives does. You just have to be conscious and aware that you are receiving something nourishing from the core identity of someone or something. And so I would say that in the end, once Haku is gone on his journey, and he has, with the help of Chihiro, remembered his name and his identity, he now is able to define himself by who he is. And that's when he goes and stands up for himself against Yubaba and makes his own way in life. I think at the end of the movie, we're supposed to believe that Haku is now self-determining his future. And so let's go to Chihiro, finally. So there's a journal, or a website, I should say, called Odyssey Online that says this. So Miyazaki explains that Chihiro had to eat food from the spirit in order to become a part of that world herself. And if she didn't, she would disappear. We see her changing into a kind of ethereal body. And this scene shows the terror of being tossed into a completely different environment, right? So that's what that article says. So there is no turning back, and the only choice that you have is to become a part of this new environment or disappear. And who knows, if she had crossed the bridge and gotten past the guardian that was the frog, the unconscious frog, she would have had some kind of all-access VPN into the spirit world, right? So when Chihiro accepts the food, she accepts her new life in this world. And she also has to eat later on again. So Chihiro, through nourishing consumption, through rejecting the kind of consumption that everyone else is feeding off of, the kind of consumption of gold and all of this, all of these material things and the crappy food like a roasted newt, right? These things, this is what people in the spirit world in this bathhouse seem to value. Roasted newts to eat, and disgusting amounts of food, and gold and material possessions. But she rejects all that. Chihiro rejects that and only accepts what she needs, and that is this nourishing, medicinal food. And that benefits her greatly because she's able to remain clear about who she is and clear about what she wants. Everyone else is going after the same thing, right? Gold, material possessions. But she is focused on her goals. What you have won't make you happy. Who you are will. So this brings us to the third theme, which is core identity. And it's something we've already touched on quite a bit, but separately, let's start with a comment by Roger Ebert, who's a very famous film critic. He's passed now, but he was one of the best in the world. He says, I was so fortunate to meet Miyazaki at the 2002 Toronto Film Festival. I told him I love the gratuitous motion in his films. Instead of every movement being dictated by the story, sometimes people will just sit for a moment, or sigh, or gaze at a running stream, or do something extra, not to advance the story, but only to give the sense of time and place and who they are. We have a word for that in Japanese, he said. It's called ma, emptiness. It's there intentionally. He clapped his hands 3 or 4 times. The time in between my clapping is ma. If you just have non-stop action with no breathing space at all, it's just busyness. Right, this is very revealing. So if you think of, for example, the character, the Sink Spirit, his whole body, after having consumed all of that junk, is just busyness, right? And at the center, once Chihiro takes out all of that junk for him, there is kind of this moment of pure emptiness, and that's when she receives the core identity, and which is the medicine that he has. Japanese poetry, I've read this in another article on Spirited Away online that talks about how Japanese poetry is filled with wordplay and how there are visual cues and words in this movie that have double meanings. For example, it says, floating at the corner of one of the buildings is a Japanese character, which means bone. And it could be a restaurant term. This is at the beginning of the movie. It could be a restaurant term, as in the creamy broth called tonkotsu, which is literally pig bone. Interestingly, this is even before the parents turn into pigs. Yet, bone is, or hon in Japanese, is used in idiomatic phrases such as hon nashi, meaning to lack a moral backbone. Right, so there's all these sorts of connections going on here that have been deliberately placed in the animation of this movie. The next question I have for you on the worksheet is, what is the significance of Yubaba taking Chihiro's name? In what ways does this parallel your own situation at work? Right, so this is for you if you face some situation at work where you perhaps feel undervalued, or you feel like you are not living the life that you would like to live. This is true for a lot of the clients that I have coached. And this takes us back to the whole prostitution aspect, because prostitutes change their names, right? No Face is trying to buy Sen. He's not trying to buy Chihiro, he's trying to buy Sen. And remember, it's not about the prostitution industry. It uses the structure of the world of prostitution to explore all the ways in which humans prostitute themselves. What happens in this world is not sexual prostitution, yet all around Chihiro is a world of an even deeper prostitution. a prostitution of identity, to sell out one's own core identity. Miyazaki uses familiar tropes and symbols of prostitution to tell the story of identity prostitution. Chihiro's persona is malleable, but her core identity remains intact. And so when Yubaba takes Chihiro's name for herself for this job, and we see the three bouncing heads, Yubaba is sitting there with her gewgaws smoking, and she says, "You will breathe your very last breath," right, as she's smoking. and of course this is linked with consciousness. We already have this connection between breath and consciousness with the frog on the bridge, right? She breathes on the bridge and the frog sees her. He's suddenly conscious of it, and then Haku makes the frog unconscious very easily, and they run off. So there's this connection with breath and consciousness already. And Chihiro signs her name, and Yubaba takes it immediately, says, "It's mine now." This happens in a working environment. An employer essentially takes your right to be who you want to be, right? Because now you have to do what they say, and in a lot of cases, be what they say you must be. And I think this is very much the case here. Only Chihiro is strong enough. She's conscious enough to not let it affect her, right? You can be in a job without losing your identity, but a lot of people struggle with that. A lot of people go to a job and they allow the job to become who they are, and they take on this persona and this role, and they forget their name, they forget their identity, who they are, and they get stuck and forget themselves. And then we have Haku and his core identity. He does not remember his name. He says that the pigs do not remember being human. And he warns Chihiro not to forget her name, because he says, then you won't be able to find your way back home. Now again, we've talked about home as a kind of central connection with your identity. And it's all about this conscious awareness, this conscious connection with who you are at your core. And that is, if you look at all of the characters in this movie, the ones who are strongest, right? We've got Chihiro herself. We've got Haku, especially toward the end, right? He survives all of these dangers, and he comes out, and when he remembers who he is, he stands up for himself against Yubaba. We've also got the stink spirit, the so-called stink spirit, the river spirit that was underneath all of that rubbish. That is strength, right? That is pure strength to will yourself to the bathhouse, even with all of this stuff hanging over you. To fly away in that powerful way in which he did. And these are really strong characters. All of them have remained conscious, or have gained consciousness, regained consciousness of their core identity. Right? Beneath all of the layers of shit. The ones who are weak, they're the ones who have fallen prey to all of these external distractions, the gold, the material possessions, the food, anything they can consume, that is what in this movie leads to weakness. But what leads to strength is being intact with your core identity. And when Haku is rescued by Chihiro the first time with the medicine, Kumaji even recognizes, he says, pure love broke the spell. And Chihiro knew that her parents weren't pigs because she could see past the layers. She even conciliates with Yubaba as Chihiro has seen through the tough exterior of Yubaba into the warm persona she has somewhere inside. So Chihiro now has become very insightful in that she can see past layers. She can see into people's core spirits, right? She's much stronger than anyone else in that regard. And it's the love. What keeps her connected ultimately with her core identity? What keeps any of these characters connected with their core identity? You may be asking yourself, okay, so Gabriel, I understand that what you're saying is I need to remain conscious of my core identity as I go through life in order to be strong, in order to have strength of character. That's what I need to do. But how do I do that? Here's the answer. It's when Kumaji says, love broke the spell. Chihiro's love is what keeps her focused on her goal. It keeps her focused on who she has to be. She never becomes tempted to sell herself out. She operates on love. Love for her parents, love for Haku, and ultimately love for herself. She even shows love to Yubaba, love to No Face, love to the Stink Spirit, right? It's her love. Love will always anchor you to who you are, to what is important. Deep beneath all the layers that we have built, all the rubbish we have consumed, is pure love. And I don't mean that in a fluffy kind of way. I mean that once you reach that emptiness, that point called Ma, literally all there is left is pure being. Being with a capital B. And that's what we all are at the core. And because that's what we all are, we all have the same essence. It's not just that we are connected. It's that we all are the same being. Being can be a noun or a verb, and it doesn't matter because it's the same. We've all just forgotten that we are that being. We've forgotten because of everything we've consumed, all the layers we've created to fill the emptiness. We're scared of emptiness, right? So we fill it. We fill it with shit. But you can nourish that too. And the layers are okay. We're here to create layers because layers are art. But hold on to the love. The love reminds us who we are. So, I recommend going to the website and getting the worksheets for yourself. There's a little extra there, but for now, I will give you 3 final takeaway questions here. And that is, in what ways do you define yourself by what you have? Be honest. Be honest with yourself. Because remember, awareness. Awareness is what will get you past all of the layers of junk, right? So be aware of how you define yourself by what you have. Number 2, in what ways do you define yourself by what you do? And number 3, in what ways do you define yourself by who you are? We can go very deep on that, but don't have time. So please, if you enjoyed this podcast, leave me a positive review on iTunes. It really does help. And wherever you are listening to this, it helps the podcast grow. It will help me to reach a lot of other people who may really benefit from this. I might even read out your review on the show. Subscribe to the YouTube channel, Gabriel Sean Wallace. Check out the website, GabrielSeanWallace.com. If you're interested in getting one-to-one identity coaching with me or creativity coaching with me, where you would get completely personalized service and my full attention, then you can send me a message on my website or email me from there if you want. I will give you one-to-one coaching sessions via Skype or Zoom or WeChat. You can find out all about that on my website too. Check out the creativity course and have a great day wherever and whenever and whoever you are, and keep growing into you.